What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode in the Ask Me Anything series. It feels great to say that. It has been a long time since the last upload on this channel, but we are back. A lot has happened in the NHL since the last time I uploaded, so we have no shortage of things to talk about, and as always, you guys absolutely killed it with the questions, so shout out to each and every one of you who left a question on the post. If you end up enjoying this episode and you want to see another one next week, then be sure to leave the video a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help with the videos a ton. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and kick this episode off with the first question from Billy O'Brien, who says, a two-part question: thoughts on the Jacob Trouba trade, and is there any more big shakeups we can see the Rangers make? My initial reaction to the Trouba trade was that I was very surprised. I wasn't surprised that he was traded. We all knew that was coming based on what was reported before news came out that he was traded to Anaheim, but I really thought, given the fact that Trouba is still signed through this season and next at a cap hit of $8 million, that the New York Rangers would have also had to give whatever team is trading for Jacob Trouba a prospect or a draft pick, or at the very least, I thought the Rangers would have had to retain salary and then not really get anything in return, maybe future considerations. So when I saw that he was traded to Anaheim and there was no salary retention, and the Rangers also got back a draft pick and a depth defenseman in Vakanainen, I was very surprised. The fact that the New York Rangers were able to offload both Barclay Goodrow and Jacob Trouba's contracts and they didn't have to give up anything to do so is pretty crazy to me. Say what you want about how the Rangers handled the situation. Jacob Trouba obviously wasn't very happy about how things went, but at the end of the day, the NHL is a business, and just like how Jacob Trouba had every right to use his no-move clause in the summer when the Rangers tried to trade him, the Rangers had every right to do whatever it took to trade him this season because that no-move clause changed to a modified no-trade clause. I thought it was a great trade for the Rangers. Obviously, I don't think getting rid of Trouba is immediately going to fix all of their problems, but the added cap flexibility is nice, and we saw them put it to good use right away as they signed Shesterkin to a massive extension. And as far as this trade goes for the Anaheim Ducks, I'm sure a lot of young guys in that locker room, especially young defensemen, are going to benefit from having a guy like Jacob Trouba in the locker room. His physical presence should make them a little bit tougher to play against. Having Gudas and Trouba on the same blue line is insane. You got to keep your head up when you're playing the Anaheim Ducks. Aside from that, though, not a huge fan of this trade for the Ducks. Obviously, they have an abundance of cap space, so they could easily afford to take on the remainder of Trouba's contract, but I definitely don't think this was the best use of their cap space, especially considering the fact that they didn't get a pick or a prospect along with Trouba, and they actually had to give up assets to bring him in. And to quickly answer the second part of your question, I do think there's going to be more shakeups to the New York Rangers, specifically to the forward group. It's been rumored that they're open to trading Mika Zibanejad. I don't know how realistic that is. He's not having the greatest season. I feel like his contract probably makes him pretty difficult to trade. I think somebody like Chris Kreider is a lot more likely to be dealt than Mika Zibanejad. A lot of Rangers fans won't want to hear that. There's obviously an emotional attachment there with Chris Kreider being the longest tenured Ranger, but he's somebody that I think could fetch the Rangers a really nice return in a trade. Like Zibanejad, he is having a bit of a down year, but this is still a guy who prior to this season had back-to-back 35-plus goal years, and the year before that he scored a career-high 52 goals. And the biggest thing is he's on a pretty solid contract, a cap hit of $6.5 million, signed for 2 more years after this season. That contract is very tradable, and I think there would be no shortage of teams out there interested in bringing in Chris Kreider, so I feel like he's the most likely candidate to be traded to really shake things up when it comes to the Rangers forward group. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Samuel Paradis, who says, wanted to know who is your biggest snub from every country for the 4 nations rosters. Starting off with Team Canada, obviously a ton of fantastic players left off the roster, which isn't a big surprise. We knew there was going to be. Just off the top of my head, some of the players that come to mind first: Mark Scheifele, Evan Bouchard, and definitely Logan Thompson. I was surprised he wasn't selected as one of Canada's 3 goaltenders, especially considering how fantastic of a season Thompson is having with the Capitals, and the fact that there weren't really a ton of great options for Team Canada when it came to goaltenders. When it comes to the United States, I think this one is easy. In my opinion, the biggest snubs definitely were Tage Thompson and Cole Caulfield. Cole Caulfield actually leads All-American NHL players in goals this season. No disrespect to these players, but I definitely would have had Caulfield and Thompson on the roster over guys like Brock Nelson, Vincent Trocheck, and Chris Kreider, but it's clear the United States wanted to go with more of a veteran presence in their bottom 6. Moving on now to the biggest biggest snub from Team Sweden, I'm definitely going with William Eklund, who is having a great season with San Jose. I was really hoping he was going to be on the roster. He's a really fun player to watch. Now, Team Sweden does look very good, so it's a valid question to ask who would you take off the roster in favor of William Eklund, but I think the answer to that is easy. I would definitely have had him on the roster over somebody like Victor Arvidsson. And lastly, we have Finland. I don't really think there were any egregious snubs here, but I will say I was a little bit surprised that Jesperi Kotkaniemi didn't make the team and somebody like Joel Armia did. Kotkaniemi can play center or the wing. He's really good defensively, and I just think is a lot more versatile than Armia. Moving along now to the next question, some more trade talk here. This one comes from 666 Hypocrisy, who says, I would like to hear your thoughts on the trades from previous weeks. In my opinion, Nashville fleeced Dallas on the Wedgwood Noonan trade, and the Rangers clearly won the Trouba trade. Minnesota's looking good for the future with Juracek, though I can't say I'm familiar with Damian Hunt and what Minnesota lost with him. So we'll skip over the Jacob Trouba trade because we already talked about that, and I'll quickly give my thoughts on the Wedgwood Noonan trade. So you said you think Nashville fleeced Dallas. I'm guessing you meant Colorado, but I don't really think Nashville fleeced Colorado when it comes to this trade. I do think it's a really solid deal for Nashville, bringing in a guy like Justus Noonan, especially after trading Askarov. You now get another young goaltender in Noonan. He's 24 years old and was obviously having a rough year with the Avalanche, but there's definitely some upside there, and he's had stretches in the NHL where he's looked really good. And when it comes to this deal for the Avalanche, I mean, they were desperate. They have no time to waste. They are in their Stanley Cup contending window right now, and Noonan's play this season wasn't cutting it. So they decided to go out and get more of a veteran option in Scott Wedgwood, and it's only been a couple of games, but so far so good. Wedgwood has looked really good for Colorado. He's got a cap hit of just $1.5 million, and he signed at that number through next season as well. So that's an aspect of this trade that I like for the Avalanche. All in all, I think this was a pretty solid deal for both sides. And lastly, we have the Juracek trade. Just as a refresher, the Minnesota Wild acquired defenseman David Juracek along with a 2025 fifth-round draft pick in exchange for Damian Hunt, a 2025 first-rounder, a 2026 third and fourth rounder, and a 2027 second. I'll be honest, Columbus got a lot better of a return for Juracek than I thought they were going to. I think they did pretty well here, all things considered. Obviously, the ideal scenario for Columbus would have been Juracek became, a stud top-pairing defenseman for them, but at the end of the day, he wasn't happy with how he was being utilized. The Blue Jackets obviously didn't think he was deserving of a big role with them in the NHL yet. With Juracek, the blue line was pretty crowded, especially after claiming Dante Fabro off waivers, who plays the same side as Juracek. After they claimed Fabro, I think the writing was on the wall. We knew Juracek was probably on the outs, and it's not like he was a Don Waddell draft pick anyways, so the GM didn't have that kind of attachment to the player. Given the situation, again, I think Columbus did pretty well, but that's not to say I think Minnesota overpaid. I would definitely say the biggest asset they gave up was that first round draft pick, but Minnesota's having a very good season. That first rounder is likely going to be a later first round draft pick. So with the way they have performed this season, they definitely put themselves in a position to be able to go out and make a move like this. And I actually think making a move like this is smarter than, say, if they would have went and traded a first round draft pick around the trade deadline to get, a veteran rental. Juracek is a guy who could very well end up being a staple in the Minnesota Wild's top four for a very long time. If he ends up becoming anything close to the player he was expected to be when Columbus selected him 6th overall, the Minnesota Wild's blue line is looking very good for the future with guys like Brock Faber, Zeev Buium, and David Juracek. The next question we have comes from Brendan Baden, who says, how do you feel about the Capitals' start, and do you think they can keep it going? I definitely feel like we're past the point of this just being a hot start for the Washington Capitals. That is a very good team. Spencer Carberry is a fantastic coach. The difference between last year's Washington Capitals to this season's version of the team is pretty crazy. Sure, they were still able to squeak into the playoffs last season, but nobody really gave them a fighting chance, and they ultimately ended up getting swept by the New York Rangers. This was a team that really struggled offensively last season, and for the most part were carried by Charlie Lindgren, who had a phenomenal year. Now this season, they are an offensive dynamo. They lead the NHL with 4.04 goals per game on average. They have continued to play well, even with Alexander Ovechkin out of the lineup. The additions they made in the offseason to their blue line have really paid off as well. Jacob Chikrin and Matt Roy have been really good for them. And just like last season, they are once again getting phenomenal goaltending, except this season it's from Logan Thompson, who has just one regulation loss in 14 starts. Now with that all being said, do I think the Washington Capitals are going to win the President's Trophy? Probably not. I do feel like there is a regression coming, especially when it comes to their offense. I can't see Dylan Strome being a 110-point player all season. I don't think McMichael's going to score 45 plus goals, but at this point they have built themselves such a big cushion as to where even if there is a bit of regression, I think this is still comfortably a playoff team, probably in one of those top 3 spots in the Metro. Moving along now to the next question. This one comes from Lil Timmy, who says, is Quinn Hughes the best defenseman in the NHL? And if so, how big is the gap? I've said on the channel multiple times that I think Cale Makar is the best defenseman on the planet, but given how last season went and how both of those players have performed so far this season, I think my stance has changed. I do believe right now Quinn Hughes is the best defenseman in the NHL. Cale Makar is obviously still producing offensively at an extraordinary rate, but I think Quinn Hughes has clearly been the better overall defenseman when you factor in last season and what we've seen so far this season. I really believe if the season ended today that Quinn Hughes would be deserving of some Hart Trophy votes. He has become such a beast of an all-around player. The Canucks have such a clear advantage when he's on the ice. As far as how big is the gap between Quinn Hughes and somebody like Cale Makar, I don't think it's huge. I think Makar is still right there and should be in the conversation for the best defenseman in the NHL. I would say the gap between Cale Makar and whoever the third best defenseman in the NHL would be is a lot bigger than the gap between Hughes and Makar, but again, I do feel like right now Hughes is the best defenseman in the NHL, factoring in last season and the first quarter or so of this season. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Vay Sports on X, who let me know how to pronounce their name, so shout out to you for that. The question is, how much more does Sam Reinhart have to do to be considered a top 10 player in the league if he's not there already? If you were to tell me you thought Sam Reinhart is a top 10 player in the league right now, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. I think he has easily become one of the most valuable players in the entire NHL. 57 goals last season, and so far this season he's tied for 5th in the NHL in scoring with 38 points. And aside from his offensive production, the dude is a beast of a 200-foot player. He would be my pick to win the Selke Trophy at this point in the season. He's also one of, if not the most effective special teams player in the entire league when you factor in how good he is on both the penalty kill and the power play. In my opinion, there are very few players who have the kind of overall impact on a game that Sam Reinhart has for the Florida Panthers. I definitely think he is probably a top 10 player in the league right now. And now finally, finishing up this week's episode with a question from AC1, who says, do you think the Wings need a change in coaching or with management in the front office? Something is obviously not clicking with this team. There was a ton of Red Wings related questions sent in this week. Again, I haven't uploaded in a while, but during that time I haven't uploaded, the Red Wings haven't been doing very much winning. They've lost 5 straight games now, all 5 games decided by 1 goal. The Red Wings really just do not look like a team that is going to be anywhere close to a playoff spot come the end of the season. I've been going back and forth on if I think they should fire Derek Lalonde. I'd like to see them to, just for the sake of changing something, because like you said, something just obviously isn't clicking with this team. Offensively, they are terrible. They are not shooting pucks enough. They are not generating near enough high quality scoring chances. Watching the Red Wings play this season for the most part has been an absolute snooze fest. When it comes to the defense, they only have one good pairing. That's Edvinsson and Seider. The bottom 4 sucks. For the most part, they've gotten pretty solid goaltending this season, but it doesn't matter how good of goaltending they're getting because they just cannot score enough goals and cannot generate enough offense to win games consistently. Even if they were to fire Lalonde, I don't think they turn it around and make the playoffs or anything like that, so part of me feels like they're just going to let Derek Lalonde coach out the remainder of his contract. His contract is up at the end of the season. I think the hard truth when it comes to the Red Wings this season is the roster is just not good enough, which is a front office, which is a management problem. That's not to say I think Steve Yzerman should be fired. I do not feel that way, but I think one thing that has become very clear this season is that this is still a rebuilding team and they are not fully out of this rebuild just yet. I think with the success Detroit had last season, finishing just 1 point shy of a playoff spot, it led to people having way too high of expectations for the Red Wings this season. It's getting to the point where this season might just be a wash for the Red Wings. I don't think getting a top 5 draft pick would necessarily be the worst thing in the world. Obviously, it would make this season tough to watch, but I think the Red Wings could definitely use a player like James Haggins, Michael Misa, or Porter Martone, all guys that are expected to be selected near the top of the upcoming NHL draft. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. It's great to be back. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you ended up enjoying this episode and you want to see another one next Monday, then be sure to leave the video a like. That's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed. I appreciate all of you guys sticking with me and continuing to support the channel. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.